Hello guys and welcome to the Sicilian Paramour. Today we're going to discuss about a few traps in the classical variation of the Caro Kann. So without further ado, let's get into this. After e4 c6 we have the Caro Kann and d4 d5. Now white has many options he can play here. He can play the exchange variation or the pawn of Botvinnik. He can go for the advance. He can probably play knight c3, knight d2, depends, or he can even play this fantasy variation. I think that's what it's called. But we are here to discuss knight to c3. Although the positions we are talking about can also be reached after the move knight to d2, because after takes and takes is the same position. Now there are many moves that you can play here, so we'll actually just go and look at a few trappy lines. This is not a repertoire of any sort, so please bear with me. This is just to show you some cute traps that exist in these lines. Let's check the move g6. Alright, so after g6, bishop c4, bishop g7, just naturally developing, knight f3, and knight to f6 is the good move here. However, you might be concerned about knight f6 and knight takes f6, so it might just be a very good procedure, to develop knight to d7 first. A very Caro Kann-ish, if that's a word, approach to the position, so that when the other knight comes up, after chopping the other knight on d7, the queen's knight can actually take his place. However, this is just a blunder, and if you want to check out why the blunder is, you can pause the video, search it for yourself. I'm going to show you now. Alright, so the refutation to knight d7 is bishop takes f7. Now a similar trap is also available in certain variations of the Philidor or even the check pits. So the king takes f7, otherwise you just pawn down for nothing. Knight f to g5. However, I think that more precise would have been knight e to g5, but hey. After knight from f to g5, king e8 is probably the only move. If you go king to f8, then knight d6 will forward the king and the queen. So king e8, knight e6, forking the queen and the bishop. So queen b6. It doesn't really matter if you give the check with the queen. So queen b6, and now knight takes g7. Check. After king f7, knight e6. Now this is the class move. Knight e6. It's just giving up a knight here. The recommended move would actually be knight f6, so that you at least have an escape square for the king to go back to g8. But this is what happened in this short miniature game. After king takes e6, knight g5 check. There are so many places that you can go to. Let's check out the worst one first. King f6 is just queen f3 check and mate. That's a good mate. Anywhere else would be, say, king d6. It would be met with bishop f4. Just a computer line, but it shows you all the danger that it has. Going back with the king will just be met with castle. So say king to e8 and check, d8, check, here, check, mate. Alright. In the game, what happened was, after the check, he went king d5. Now c4 would have actually been very precise, but it's all the same. Queen f3, king c4. You cannot survive with a king like this. Bishop d2 check, king a3, and queen c3. And here he decided to throw in the towel and resign, because nothing can stop bishop c1 mate. Alright. So this is the kind of trouble that you can land in by such a seemingly innocent move, that is knight to d7. Alright, what else? So this was the g6 line, one trap in the g6 line. Let's look at, say, let's look at knight f6. Now this is the Bronstein variation. It's a very dynamic line. After white takes and black recaptures with the g pawn. However, let's look at a very high-profile game. It is Richard Reti versus Sabieli Tatsakova. And Richard Reti played here queen d3. And after e5, we had takes. And instead of the queen takes, what Tatsakova decided was queen check, which was a double attack, and now taking the pawn back. This is already pretty risky. since you're moving along with the king, and after queenside castle now, this entire d file is lined up. So the best move over here would actually have been either bishop e7 or bishop e6, just trying to cover up a few of the holes left behind, and try to nullify the pressure of the white queen and rook on the d file. But Tatagor missed the tactic. After knight takes e4, if you want to see what the tactic is, you can pause the video. It's not that tough at all. It's pretty straightforward. The queen sack, queen d8 just wins. The forced move is king takes, and now this double check with the bishop and the discovered check with the rook. Now there's nothing you can do. Going to e8 with the king just lands into rook d8, something very similar to the Morphy Opera mate. And going to e8 will just, not e8 of course, to c7 will land you in bishop d8 mate. It's a pretty small miniature, just 11 moves, but something that you can watch out for. You have to. Alright, now let's go to slightly more, bigger, most popular variations. Bishop f5. Now the main move, of course, here is to gain the tempo on the bishop. The move I want to discuss is bishop d3, which is basically gambiting the d4 pawn, because the queen can take it. However, white is getting a lot of development for all of this. Knight f3 hits the queen, queen b6, bishop e3 hits the queen again. Now, of course, queen takes b2 will just be met with rook b1, and the pawn on b7 hangs. Queen c7 is a natural enough move. Now either castle or knight g to e5 is equally good. Now that one pawn deficit is not that big of a deal here, because white has a lot of development. In fact, all of his minor pieces are developed, while only one lonely bishop is developed for black. So this is pure gambit play. Now knight e to g5 is, let me just show you a trap here. So after bishop d3, queen, you're attacking that pawn, and don't even think about just playing h6, because knight e6, that's the star move. Of course you can take, but after queen g6 check, king d8 check, knight here, and knight d4. Now this position is already designable. You're threatening a fork, so even if you leave, there is still this. Knight takes e6, queen a5, queen e8 check. That's the forced move, queen back, and then takes. There's nothing to avoid this kind of disaster after you allow a move such as knight e6. Alright. So this was one of the things here. Let's see. Now, the most popular variation, I think, is known as the Smyslov or the Karpov variation, is just knight d7, preparing knight f6. Alright, so there are many variations here, but let's just get the cutest trap out of the way here, which is queen e2, which is basically, such a cliche trap now that nobody is gonna fall for this. But I'll not be surprised if somebody does. So the refutation for this is the obvious move. Knight g to f6 can actually be met by, if you want to guess, white to play and win. Alright, just knight d6, mate. Straight away. I think Alekhine and Paul Keres have both been, lucky enough to land this thing on their unsuspecting opponents. But of course, queen e2 is not the main move. Let's see another line here, which is bishop c4. After the natural knight g f6, knight takes c3. Now this is a very devious move, the move c3. It just looks like it's protecting the center. Maybe white will develop his knight to f3 and just castle, have a happy life. And a very natural move here would just be bishop to f5. Just moving the bishop out of the pawn chain and then playing e6 later on. That's the whole idea of the Caro Kann. The bishop is not restricted as it is in the French, but this is just a bad move because c3 not only defended or bolstered the d4 pawn, it also allowed the queen to have access to this diagonal. And after queen b3, believe it or not, you're just losing a pawn now. So a move like knight to d5 would just be met with queen takes b7, knight b6, kind of like blocking out the queen threatening the bishop. Now it's very important to notice that queen takes c6 here actually loses to bishop d7. Now the queen has to move to a square where it's still defending the bishop. So say queen e, c5 and e6. And now the queen can no longer go to a square and still be protecting the bishop. So after something like queen h5, knight takes c4, it's actually black who has the upper hand now. But white doesn't have to take on c6 after knight b6, and you can just play knight f3, just developing. Now if you may be wondering what happens after the knight takes, is then queen takes c6, bishop, and then here. So after a move like say rook to c8 or f6, which are the recommended computer moves, the game goes on and it's not that big of a deal anymore because the bishop can always drop back and it's not a big of a problem. White is simply a pawn up here. Black doesn't have enough compensation for this. Alright, so instead of bishop c4, let's there's so many things you can play here. Let's check out a very trappy line. It's knight g5. Now to someone who doesn't know the theory of this line or anything, knight g5 might look like a pretty stupid move. It's also violating a lot of principles of opening play. You're just moving the same piece twice. I mean, it's not, not without its drop of venom. Alright, so a move like say, let's look at f6. Of course, this is not a natural move. Nobody would try to kick the knight with f6, but rather h6. But let's see if f6 ever took place. Then bishop d3 is the most easiest refutation for this. Now, taking the knight, obviously here would just lead to instant disaster. After queen check and g6, which is the only move. And it would be an extremely big mistake if you do not sacrifice your queen and take with the bishop. So please do sacrifice your queen and then give mate. Of course, it's a pretty mate here. And if you decide to protect this pawn with say a move like g6, then you're just in for a surprise. Knight takes h7 and the standard trick. And now you don't even have to take the rook. You can just continue increasing the pressure. Now when the computer says that knight to e5, just sacrificing the knight is the best move, you know how pathetic of a position it is for black. So let's go back. Of course, f6 is not something that people would readily play. Either h6 is actually a slightly better move here. But even then, knight e6, an idea we saw previously. This idea still works here. Now there are many things you can do. Obviously you cannot take because of this checkmate. It's all forced, so you cannot take it, of course. Let's see. Going to b6, we can just take the bishop and knight f3, and the game is on. Of course, there's nothing special, of course, but then yeah, h6 is kind of weakening. It's also a hook, but that might be arguable. People may say maybe the bishop has a good home here after this maneuver, but yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Say queen a5 check, we have bishop d2, queen b6. Now the b6 is actually attacking this pawn, as in the previous line with directly b6. The pawn was already defended by the bishop. That's the difference. So say after queen a5 check, bishop d2, bishop, queen b6, bishop d3 is actually a move here. Of course, the knight can simply just take the bishop and we will return to the other position, but bishop d3 is actually a pretty playable move here. Now a good move would just be knight f to g to f6, but why not just take the pawn? And the reason for that is after check, if you want to see why this move loses, you can of course pause your video. It's not that tough, as again it's just bishop to a5. The bishop is protected by the queen and it forks, or not forks, actually pins the queen to the king. It's winning the queen on the next move. So yeah, it's pretty horrible. And if you play the kind of like the mainline stuff, knight g to f6, now you can simply just take the bishop and the game goes on. But even knight f3, believe it or not, is a playable move, because after takes, bishop check, king d8, and castle. White is just an entire piece down, and I don't even think he has a pawn for it. He doesn't. But the misplaced position of the black king is all up for it. A line may run like queen b2 and c4. Now just look at the position. Now white is a piece and a pawn down, but the bishop on g6 is basically just burying the king side of black. The black king here, of course, we should highlight this in yellow. It's not that good too. The queen here is actually, believe it or not, vulnerable to being trapped. So say something like queen b6, just trying to develop the bishop, already goes haywire because of queen a4. Now you may be thinking that the queen is attacking c6 and you just like defending, but then you'll understand that after rook b1, actually the queen is trapped. So you'll just have to take, which is a sorry sight, of course. So instead of b6, if you try to go back with the queen b6, queen c2, and just look at the black army. The king is misplaced, cannot castle. This bishop basically just cannot move anywhere. This bishop will only move after the knight moves, but even then where? So, and this knight is basically dominated by its own pieces and this pawn over here. We have all our pieces in the square, in the developed, and our rooks are now connected. A rook might come here to say hello to the black queen. Basically, you cannot even feel that white is a piece down here, and no wonder that such a position is actually pretty good for white. The computer may have some objective doubts, of course, but even then, even the computer will not be, Let's see what he says, Alright, he's saying it's just saying it's a draw, I mean, that's how good of a position this is for white. So this was the small detour into some of the traps here. Of course, this is only the knight c3 variation, and of course this is not exhaustive at all. There's so many traps that I might have missed, and I'm sure there are many traps I missed, because it's just such a rich opening, the Caro Kann. And these are only the traps from the white side. There are so many of them from the black side too. If somebody says, I'll probably make a video about that as well. So that was it for this one. So have a good one. Bye bye.